Namaskar, Nilesh Ok here. Today, in part 3 of Bharat Dinadarshika, I will discuss multiple specific points along the 360 degrees ecliptic around the earth for the beginning of the Indian calendar. As you will notice, there are multiple beginnings for the Indian calendar. Frankly, that is true in our times. But also, if we go back in antiquity, you will see evidence for Indian calendar or a Indian calendar beginning with a specific point. All right. So let me share PowerPoint with you. All right. So what you are seeing here is Earth at the center. And as seen from the Earth, how we will look at the position of the sun as the year progresses and the position of the sun goes through a complete cycle of 360 degrees. That is the ecliptic. The green circle or ellipse is the ecliptic, the sun's path as seen from the earth. Outside that is another circle. Okay, of course, it's a circle for a reference frame of 27 or 28 nakshatra. We will stick with 27 nakshatra. And what you see are the 4 cardinal points. Okay, so cardinal points of spring equinox, summer solstice, autumnal or fall equinox, and winter solstice. And in the current reference calendar that all of us are familiar, which is a Gregorian calendar, spring equinox falls on 23rd March or around that time. Summer solstice falls on 21st June, autumnal equinox or fall equinox falls on 23rd September, and winter solstice falls on 21st December. And as you know, the Gregorian calendars begin somewhere here on 1st of January. Okay, we will not go into why it begins on 1st of January, which doesn't exactly coincide with any of the cardinal points and so on. But to our point, the point for discussion today is to know the different beginnings for Indian calendar or Indian calendars. The reason I'm saying this is because at any given time, there could be, in principle, multiple calendars meant for multiple different purposes. All right. Even in our times, there are multiple calendars, sometimes due to regional differences, sometimes for other purposes. For example, we have a Gregorian calendar, which is used worldwide. It begins on 1st of January. And right now, that beginning does not coincide with any astronomically significant point. All right. Now, we also have our Indian calendar, we can say, which begins with the first day of the lunar month of Chaitra. Now, that may not be true for all of India, but let's go with the Indian calendar that begins with the first day of lunar month of Chaitra. Now, when this particular calendar began, that is to say, when the Indian calendar began with the first day of Chaitra, or the Chaitra is the first month, that time, which is approximately 2000 years ago, the lunar month of Chaitra indeed coincided with the first month of Vasanta Rutu. And what does that mean? That meant our Indian lunisolar calendar began with the beginning of the Vasanta Rutu. So we already have evidence for that. All right. I'm going to remove some of these positions from the picture. I'm also going to remove the specific Gregorian dates because as we go back in antiquity, the dates are not going to be exactly the same. In fact, as we go back beyond 1582 CE by convention, we will be using a Julian calendar. Okay, we don't need to refer to that here, but I'll just mention that the transition from Gregorian to Julian, as we go back in the past, will come around 1582. So I'm going to remove some additional points for the positions of the sun. Okay, so we are left with 4 cardinal points. So spring equinox, fall equinox, and summer solstice and winter solstice. And 2 additional points. The first point is the beginning of the Vasanta Rutu, which is 30 degrees before the point of spring equinox, the position of the sun. And also there's another point of the sun, which is 30 degrees before the beginning of autumnal or fall equinox. All right. Now, why did I leave these 6 points? Because there is enough reason to conjecture that in ancient times, there were calendars, possibly different calendars coexisting at even the same time, that began with some of these points. All right, so let's begin with this first point, which is the beginning of the spring equinox. That is how our current calendar began some 2000 years ago. Now, because of the precession of the Earth's axis, the month of Chaitra no longer falls during the first part of Vasanta Rutu, rather it falls during the second part of Vasanta Rutu. But we will move on, okay? So that's because of the precession of equinoxes. Now, one of my co-researchers, Mrs. Rupa Bhatti, she has done a lot of research unearthing very interesting, very intricate astronomy references from our ancient Indian narratives. And she has made a case, or she would like to make a case, that definitely one of the Indian calendars began with spring equinox, okay? So we will wait for her research to come out and we can make our assessment. Now, definitely we have references, at least indirect references in our ancient Indian narratives. For example, in Ramayana, we will hear the description that the horse of the Ashwamedha Yajna was let loose sometime in the spring, and more likely on the day of spring equinox, and then it went around and came back to this particular kingdom after 1 year, okay, again on the day of spring equinox. And that's when the Ashwamedha Yajna, actual other procedures began. Now, do we have evidence for a year beginning with summer solstice? We definitely do. My original research work, if you read When Did the Mahabharata War Happen, The Mystery of Arundhati, my first book, you will see that there is a chapter on the fall of Abhijit. That Abhijit meaning Nakshatra Abhijit or Nakshatra Vega, okay, the star Vega, and it also goes by the name Brahmarashi. So if we look at those verses from the Mahabharata text, which is referring to an ancient event, ancient with respect to Mahabharata itself, all the 8+ different specific references, they all come together of that particular reference set to around 14,500 BCE, which is to say more than 16,500 years ago. And that time the Dhanishta was given the first place as of the nakshatra, and that has to do with Dhanishta being at the summer solstice. All right, so there are many other references, for example Shravana being at the first place, and possibly even going back in further antiquity, nakshatra Rohini being at the first place. Okay, be it as it may, but we definitely have evidence for some type of calendar beginning with the summer solstice. Okay, and as I mentioned, with nakshatra Dhanishta, with nakshatra Shravan, possibly with nakshatra Rohini, we have evidence in our ancient Indian narratives. Now let's quickly move to the exactly opposite of that, which is the winter solstice. Many researchers would make a claim that there are references in our Brahmana literature, that Brahmana not to be confused with the Varna, okay? This is the Brahman Grantha, okay? And there are references which are interpreted to mean that the year began with winter solstice. So we possibly have evidence for a year beginning with winter solstice. I have not found any specific evidence to show that the year began with the autumnal equinox. Now, there are enough references that would allude to the fact that the year began with sometime in the Sharad season. So it's not surprising if we find evidence that the year began with autumnal equinox, because we do have evidence for some kind of year beginning with the remaining three cardinal points. Now the last one, which is the point for the beginning of the Sharad season. And do we have evidence for a calendar beginning with the Sharad season or the beginning of a Sharad season? The answer is definitely yes. In fact, there could be many other references, but I'll quickly mention one very important, very critical reference, and that is the Mahabharata text. For example, in Bhagavad Gita, in the Vibhuti Yoga, Krishna talks about Masana Margashirshoyam, and there he is referring to Margashirsha as one of his Vibhuti. This is in the sense that Margashirsha was considered the first month during the Mahabharata times. And all the Mahabharata text evidence, more than 300 plus specific observations, plus many simply descriptive observations, and there are many more observations, very much takes us and confirms the fact for us that Margashirsha was the first month of the calendar of Mahabharata times. It was also the first month of the Sharad season. All right. So we have that evidence. Now, what is interesting is there are many Mahabharata researchers who are not aware of these references from the Mahabharata text, where Margashirsha is the first month of the calendar. All right. So it's very easy for me to give the references, but when they feel so convinced that such a reference doesn't exist, I would rather make them do the required tapasya to arrive at those references on their own. All right. So with that, I'm going to close this video. To summarize, there are multiple points from which Indian calendar began. Okay. So it could be any of those four cardinal points, or the beginning point of the Vasanta Rutu, or spring season, or the beginning point of the Sharad Rutu, or the what you can call pre-autumn season. All right. Now, its last point is that we shouldn't assume that at any given point only one type of calendar existed. In fact, it's we have to be very comfortable to accept that at any given point of time, there could be multiple calendars and they would have coexisted, and these calendars could have been made for different purposes. We may know what the purpose was for a specific calendar, we may not know, but it's reasonable to assume that these multiple calendars coexisted. All right. So with that, I am going to stop sharing, and then I will also I'll also close the video.